Good evening, people. Welcome back to another show, John Sinclair TV, back again, and on the Thursday night. And we got Ben, Tony, and Brad. Good evening, guys.
Good evening.
Good evening, John.
Good evening.
And welcome to Ben, calling me channel for the first time. How's Ben today? You okay?
Yeah, I'm enjoying the sunshine up in Edinburgh, not too far from Newcastle. You get about 2 days of summer in Edinburgh, and I can confirm that today is one of them.
Yes, absolutely. It's absolutely boiling down here in a minute, sort of thing, in Bristol. So 25 Celsius today, which is fantastic. So, and good evening to you, Brad and Tony.
Yeah, been a fantastic day here as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant.
Fantastic. What we're going to do, guys, it's going to be a Newcastle chat tonight, and we're going to talk about transfers, talk about latest news, and we're going to talk about other things as well. If you like the video, like what you see, then hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and do follow Brad and Tony and also Ben, which is in the link on the top as well. And you'd like to be super chat, that is all there for you. If you'd like to be a member, it's 99p. So just check out on that as well. And Ben, got the first question for you before we talk about the first topic. Got one from Ryan. Big up to you, Ryan. And a question for you, big up to you. Is there any truth in the Callum Hudson-Odoi rumour? If so, what do you know about it?
Yeah, so one of the things about Callum Hudson-Odoi is whether or not he feels personally that he's got a Chelsea future, because I think from Chelsea's point of view, they want to keep the player, and it's as simple as that. And Newcastle are one of many clubs kind of circling around and trying to determine whether someone at his age, 21, might jump ship. So this is going to be an interesting one, I think, a little later in the window, perhaps, because I don't think, from what I hear at the Chelsea end, that Thomas Tuchel is necessarily going to allow him to leave too easily. Newcastle are also interested, let's not forget, in Amando Broja. And that one might be a slightly less complicated transfer, because with Broja, the player's a bit more vocal and has and will continue to say to Chelsea that he wants clarity over whether he's going to play more regularly if he stays at the football club. And if not, he might not be prepared to be loaned out again like he was to Southampton. And instead, therefore, a permanent deal becomes on the table. With Callum Hudson-Odoi, I think that there is interest from what I gather, and not just from Newcastle United either. There's plenty of clubs that are looking at him in and outside the Premier League. I actually heard only the other day that my side, Leicester, are one of them. And Lookman is a player that we had last season that a lot of fans really liked. And he's gone back to Leipzig at the moment, and Leicester could be one of the clubs that go head-to-head with Newcastle. There's nothing advanced at the moment, but he's certainly one player that is on Newcastle's radar in a position where we know that the Magpies need to strengthen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we definitely the right side to play out as well, definitely. I mean, Hudson-Odoi would not be my first choice, if I'm going to be honest, but if he comes, great. 72 appearances he's made over 5 years, but for me personally, I don't think I'd take him at this moment in time, and we'll see on that one. Big up to Paul, by the way. He's got a question for you, Ben, again. Mr. Jacobs, he called you as well. How are we the lads too? Bless. top guy, Paul. Diaby, and news on Musa Diaby. I heard that we're very close.
I'm not quite sure I'd term it very close at this point. I think it's more a case of he's becoming an increasingly priority target. And that's because of something I reported a few weeks back, which is the fee isn't quite as high as one or two others have assumed. So although it may total around 60 million all in, that will be inclusive of add-ons, but Newcastle won't have to pay anywhere near that kind of amount up front. And I think some of these Newcastle targets this summer that have been linked have perhaps been done so just because everybody loves to add Newcastle to the mix. Agents like to throw in the name to try and spark bidding wars. Players are often just added to the Newcastle conversation with not too much substance. But in the case of Diaby, Bayer Leverkusen are relatively resigned to losing him for the right offer. And we know that Eddie Howe was looking at Anthony Gordon as well, but that's not a transfer that's going to happen to Newcastle or any other club, at least as far as I'm told. So Diaby becomes a little bit more of a realistic possibility. And I think Newcastle will try and step up their efforts on this over the coming weeks. The thing about Diaby, and there's conflicting information out there, particularly in Germany, but my understanding is that he's very open to the project and the move, and would be excited also to be a part of the Premier League. So Newcastle have stepped up their efforts, but as I say, I wouldn't quite term Diaby as advanced yet. But again, a player that Dan Ashworth is starting to prioritise above others. The striker situation is the number one now for Newcastle. And then I think winger comes slightly behind it. But those two, they're areas now that Botman's in where Newcastle will look to strengthen first and foremost. And yeah, don't rule Diaby out. I don't think that it's clear cut at this point. But I do think that Newcastle and Howe in particular really, really like the player. And that's why Dan Ashworth is doing everything that he can at the moment to see whether first and foremost a fee can be agreed, and then from there, if it does advance, because what you do is in this sort of situation, you're putting out feelers, you're trying to work out whether the club's willing to sell, which they are, then you're making sure that you're not going to get that 60 million plus add-ons price, otherwise it puts them out of the market. And then from that point onwards, you start to talk more seriously. And this is the direction that Newcastle are heading in. But if a deal is to be done and get closer, I still think it's a couple of weeks away.
Yeah, good answer. Good answer. Just going to wait to see on Diaby comment. I think he likes the project. And if you said there, Ben, I have to agree with you there. But just going to wait and see. And our fans need to be patient as well. So got Dave in the chat as well. Any hopes to offloading players and to where? We'll comment on it later on. I've got Shua, Geordie and Boldman. Any links in the Marco Asensio links with Real Madrid?
I don't think this is a transfer that will happen as far as Newcastle are concerned, although Asensio is likely to go in this window. So it's kind of a difficult sell because obviously of the club that he's come from, and that type of player tends to only move for instant European football. Now, Newcastle are an anomaly in the sense that they're perhaps now able to pitch the project from a foundational level and say, well, look, if you join us now, you can get European style wages and be part of something that may go beyond just Europe. And then you've got in at ground level and you're the sort of spine of the team. But Asensio, for the reason that I've mentioned, is not only being tracked by, say, Arsenal, but Liverpool might still be in the equation and AC Milan as well. And all of those clubs have obviously got European football, and many of them have even got Champions League football. So my understanding with Asensio is that he probably prefers a move away from the Premier League if he can get one. AC Milan would be the preference, but as we saw with Botman, for example, they may want a player but not always have the finances, and then he may turn his attention to somewhere else. But Asensio is going to be in demand, and as I say, it's not clubs of Newcastle's caliber. I'm not talking about stature or fan base. I'm talking about factual caliber of what teams have next season. And I just don't see Asensio making a move. It's only my personal opinion, but obviously that is informed by talking to sources about the player. And I just don't think that he would be interested in a move to Newcastle United until the club gets to a point where it can offer him instant European football.
Good answer. Absolutely fine. So if I was a better man, I think you'd go to Milan as well. Matty wants to know, before we get the guys on as well, what does Ben know about the players as in transfer list of the day? What teams are more likely to sign? Who? And would be loans or would be a permanent deal?
To be honest, the news this morning for me was all just caught up around Ronaldo and is he going to end up going to Chelsea and Rafinha? So I haven't delved too much into Newcastle's outgoings, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't know whether there's a sort of feeling within Newcastle that they need to get rid of kind of 3 or 4 to make space. And naturally, they're will be not just those that are perhaps, as you sort of say, transfer listed, but the type of player that isn't transfer listed. But if they get a couple of incomings between now and the end of the window, those players may be made available. So if, for example, the Yuri Tielemans progress continues and Newcastle were to enter that race, and if they bid and Manchester United bid, that will be an interesting head-to-head. If Arsenal bid, I think Tielemans goes to Arsenal. But if Arsenal don't bid and Newcastle actually develop their interest in Tielemans, then where, for example, does that leave John Joe Shelvey? Probably still on the bench and part of the Newcastle setup, but it's kind of worth just considering that the club may not only look to offload players that we know that they are prepared to sell, but they may also have more of an inclination to try and get a little bit of money back, because this isn't just about fees and spending and kind of muscling in with the PIF funds. It's also about being a sustainable football club. And that's kind of why I think that it will also be important, especially given what Newcastle spent in January, to get in a little bit of income. As regards specifically the three players that are, I suppose you would have to refer to it as axed, I think it's going to be kind of intriguing to see what happens to them. So we know that Howe needs to trim down the squad. That's the first thing. So it's no surprise that we've seen some senior players sent down to the reserves. I guess that's the first thing to say to try and answer the question a little bit more directly. And then once you're in the reserves, you then know by being so that you are going to then struggle to kind of climb back up, because Newcastle have got a big enough squad that I don't think from there we're going to have any hope of those players kind of re-earning their place, if you like. So that's probably the first thing to say on that. So once you go down to the reserves, then I think it's logical to kind of say that the Newcastle United career is kind of as good as over. And that kind of just shows you, in my opinion, how far Newcastle have kind of come between being in a relegation dogfight where they were desperate for every single player and kind of now, because it's almost like, wow, how have they got to the point where they've brought in all these names, they're in European form, and they can send down Clark and Hendrick and Gale as well as the other one. So I think Gale is the first one that will be a sort of clear-cut outgoing, because as I understand it, there actually were a few inquiries for him before the window even opened. So it's probably a very little surprise to him in particular. And I think that he is also just looking for that sort of game time. So Middlesbrough, one kind of club being linked, QPR another one. And I think that Newcastle will be happy to let him go, especially at the age of 32. With Jeff Hendrick, no real intel to bring you on that one as far as interest is concerned, but I'll certainly look into it over the coming days. And then with Kieran Clark, he's also 32, not too much that Newcastle would really want to do with him. And Charlton Athletic is one club that I've heard are sort of in the mix for a versatile kind of defender come midfielder. And the good thing for Clark, if he drops down to a Championship or League One club at that kind of level, is he can offer them quite a lot. And he showed that not just in games at Newcastle since 2016, but also Aston Villa when he played for them for, I think, the best part of 7 years, that you can deploy him at left back. He can play as a central defender. He can play in central midfield. He's probably about 6'1". He's been capped internationally. So he's got all the attributes to really be quite valuable to a team, but just no longer at Premier League level. So I think they're all going to have to drop down, and none of them in their mid-30s are going to want to amble around in the under-23 side. So watch this space, and I'm sure that all three of them, come the end of the window, will have been offloaded. But the first one of those three to leave will probably be Gale.
Yeah, brilliant answers, Ben. Honestly, man, I mean, if you can get them off the wage bill, get new ones in, that'll be a cracking transfer window. But I'm going to get one of the lads, I'm going to start with Tony. Have you got a question from Ben?
I have, Ben. back in May, on May the 13th, this kit that's behind me was leaked. And I remember you put a tweet out, and basically you said, not comfortable with NUFC's new Saudi away kit. Connection sponsors, partners with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are natural under a PIF-led ownership. But mimicking Saudi shirt dilutes the identity of the club. Fans may say it's a shirt transition and the badge remains, but who's to say that's true? Now, I get where you're coming from on the Saudi colour wise, but also it's actually the same colour as the Republic of Ireland shirt as well, when they had a white and green shirt as well. But knowing that our club is owned by 80% of a PIF, and like Man City's done, like Liverpool's done, like Man United first done, when they want to go as a global brand, all we've done is we're going a global brand. So basically what we're saying is, out in the Middle East there, we've produced a shirt like that will sell well in Saudi Arabia without obviously the Fun 88 on, because obviously that's against their rules for betting wise. And I just wanted your thoughts on that. I mean, has this shirt grown on you now, or are you still a bit like on the fence with this one?
I think the kit made me feel uncomfortable because of the secrecy and lack of explanation given by Newcastle. And I know in their marketing emails, they did directly say that it's a nod to the new ownership, but still the connection to the football club. And that's a nice creative. So my point is that if Newcastle are to launch the kit, which, as you say, makes a lot of business sense, particularly with Noon, which is like an equivalent of Amazon in that region, then they're going to be able to market themselves and grow a bit of an affinity with the football club in the country and more broadly the region through which they're majority owned. So it's not for me about whether the kit is right or wrong. It's about the explanation and how Newcastle United use the kit. And the reason that I feel uncomfortable is because sport washing is about putting out a message that is often a little bit secret and doesn't own up to transparency and accountability. And obviously, Newcastle during the takeover made it very clear that they were pushing transparency. And now, as we head to almost 9 months of new ownership, both media and fans have not heard a peep out of the majority owners, PIF. And it's all very well saying, well, Amanda Staveley speaks on their behalf, but she's still a minority owner. So I'm not saying that the kit isn't a good thing for Newcastle. And I'm not saying that Newcastle shouldn't be proud of Saudi ownership. I'm saying if they want to go down that route, be proud about it, be transparent about it, be loud about it, and then you've got a counter. And of course, that's going to cause a media storm, and you're going to get the other side that says sports washing, and Saudi Arabia had 81 beheadings a few months back and Jamal Khashoggi. But Newcastle can only counter sports washing if, instead of just doing something subtly for business purposes or because they want a small nod towards Saudi colours without causing a stir, Newcastle, in my mind anyway, can only do something positive for Saudi Arabia under Vision 2030 and for themselves if they own the Saudi ownership and are transparent. So therefore, instead of having a debate about what's right and what's wrong, although that is part of it in the bigger picture, and I'm sure fans accept that, but from a football perspective, use the tools at your disposal to give Saudi Arabia and Newcastle's ownership group a platform to promote what they perceive to be positive. So instead of it being about drama and criticism, it becomes about how can Newcastle use their platform, use the Saudi colours, use the connections, use the region, use the ownership to show what Saudi Arabia perceived to be the good things. And then if people want to counter that, that is their prerogative. But at least you've not just said, like Hal's said now 1 or 2 times, I'm just a football manager. And at least as the ownership group, you've not hidden away. And at least with the kit, you've not just put it out there and very softly gone, oh yeah, and it's actually a nod to a new era. So it's not the Republic of Ireland. They've specifically said the new era. So we know exactly why they've done it. And it makes business sense. So I'd just like to see them own it a bit more, and then I'd feel comfortable, because then you've got the ability, as you can see in the background behind you, to say, well, we've launched a kit in the Saudi colours to have more of an affinity with our new fans in Saudi, whilst at the same time not forgetting our roots. We've launched the kit with male and female players to promote diversity and inclusion in Saudi Arabia. We've taken off the betting partner because we're respectful to that region and we encourage our fans to gamble responsibly. Perhaps proceeds of the kit are going towards a particular charity that the ownership group supports, and so on. And I'm not saying that everything has to have an explanation, everything has to have a specific. I'm just saying you've got 2 choices whenever you do anything at Newcastle United now. One is to do it quietly and almost with embarrassment, and the other is to do it proudly. And each way is going to have repercussions, but it just strikes me as a missed opportunity to do anything in Saudi Arabia when the club has promoted transparency for so long and not be proud of it and not explain it. And you're right that not every football club explains their kit, but this is not a kit that is only just colours. This is a kit that has been made to celebrate a connection between Newcastle and Saudi Arabia. And as soon as you start with that point that you are celebrating Newcastle and Saudi Arabia's connection, and hey, why not from a football point of view? Because the new ownership group have helped get the football club back in many fans' eyes. But then if you're going to go that far and do it, don't then sneak away and not comment on it and not speak to media and not engage with fans, because otherwise it's a missed opportunity to insightfully know what you perceive to be the positives within Saudi Arabia, as opposed to just make no comment and then leave yourself open to criticism. So that's why I felt uncomfortable about the situation. And I hope that over time, that's what Newcastle do. Maybe when the new sponsor comes in and as we get closer to Vision 2030, or if Newcastle go over to Saudi Arabia and play in the kit, maybe that's the opportunity. But I think in essence, the crux of all of this in my mind is just that until your majority ownership groups speak openly about what they're doing positively, how they're trying to change perceptions in Saudi Arabia, it will always just be sports washing, because they just refuse to acknowledge the agenda. And that is my reason for feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Good answer, Ben. Good question for you. Tony, I'll go through this comment as well. Big up to Danielle. Where's Ben hiding his Newcastle shirt? Who knows, a Toon fan, Seeker fan, really? In all seriously, though, good luck to Leicester City this season. And that's for Danielle. She's one of my favourites on the chat. It's a green and white kit. Shouldn't even be a topic. It's aesthetic. That's some people make it a 1. And just a few questions come. So I'm going to go on to Brad in a bit. Got some people, Foxy as well, talk about it since there. Got on the Leeds for 25 million quid, and he's gutted. And got Luca, a Guna fan as well. Big up to Luca, my guy. Hope you're okay. And he also said, now, how did you get Ben Jacobs? I said to Luca, pure skill, mate. Pure skill. Figure Saka, top of the net, and then that's how I got Ben. There you go. I love Luca, by the way. He's a great guy. Ben, what's your latest on Tielemans? I saw you on the Curtis show.
Nothing's really changed, certainly not in the last 24 hours, other than a growing feeling that Arsenal believe he's a more likely target than Milinkovic-Savic. And Arsenal have known for quite some time that if Arsenal make an offer for Tielemans that's accepted, Yuri Tielemans will join Arsenal. He's already agreed personal terms. So that's the good news. The bad news is that Arsenal haven't yet made an offer. Lowest end of the fee, about 25 million. Highest end in the mid-30s. Leicester are tough negotiators. But if Arsenal don't get Tielemans, it's because Arsenal don't want Tielemans rather than because Arsenal can't get Tielemans. And that is bad news, I suppose, for Newcastle and Manchester United, because if Arsenal bid, then there's only going to be one winner as far as I understand it. And then if Arsenal don't bid, which is still the case at the moment, then Manchester United and who knows, still potentially Newcastle could come into the mix. And the only sort of hope that Newcastle and Manchester United have got, even if Arsenal do end up still being in the conversation, is that how and Ashworth haven't spoken in any advanced detail yet to Tielemans, so they'll still have an opportunity to pitch. He won't be aware of the exact terms at this stage. And then Manchester United, their problem was that Tielemans didn't want to move in January when he thought that the Arsenal move was almost definite and Ralph Rangnick was in charge. And he wasn't sold on United because of the instability at the football club. And he always wanted to join Arsenal, Tielemans, as well. Even before Monaco, he had an opportunity to go there when he was really young, but he was worried he wouldn't get game time football. So it's like a full circle move if it happens in many respects for Tielemans. But with Manchester United, when they made an approach in January, it was clear to them that Tielemans wouldn't join under Rangnick. But now Ten Hag is kind of reviving the interest a little bit by adding him at least to a shortlist. And if that advances, it's sort of a new pitch to Tielemans under a new era. And he might be able to persuade Tielemans that United is now the right club with a different culture, a different philosophy, maybe no CR7 either. So it's a bit up in the air at the moment. And I'm surprised, to be perfectly honest with you, especially as a Leicester fan, because I've seen Tielemans week in, week out now for many years. And to be at this stage of the window and have no formal offers to Leicester City is very, very strange, because he's Premier League ready, he's a goal scorer, he's box to box, he's a superb asset to any team and a bargain price, whether you're paying the 25 million or even up to 35 million. That's a good price for a player of his age and quality. So it's a case of watching this space. It's in Arsenal's control, but if Arsenal don't bid, then it becomes a very open race.
Good question there, Luca, by the way. I've got someone, PDK, we spoke about that earlier on, mate, about shirts, so I was going to cover that. I think as fans, we can wear the third kit and still have conversations around the human rights issues, etc., etc. For me, it's important to talk about it. So Danielle, she's talking a lot of sense. Mr. Jacobs, will you be going to the World Cup and reported it? I want to ask from Paul.
Yeah, I will be going to the World Cup and reporting it. The thing that people don't realise about me is that during the takeover, I was obviously billed somehow as a Qatari spy, and it couldn't have been further from the truth. And if anybody is watching that has either seen BN Sports or has followed my work from time in Dubai, from time, by the way, in Saudi Arabia, working directly with PIF on sports events, and from time in Qatar, then you will know firsthand and speak to people out in the Middle East. If you happen to know one or two, there's Peter Redding, who does a podcast that lives in Dubai. There's Andrew Nagy, who is the editor of Esquire, both Newcastle fans. So some people listening might know them. That's the only reason why I name drop them. They'll all tell you the same thing, that I was one of the fiercest, most outspoken journalists in the entire MENA region, constantly challenging various norms around social inclusion and diversity, to the point where when Amnesty International came over to do a World Cup site check, we were out with them in the Labour camp, speaking to the workers and the taxi drivers and so on. So everyone just assumes that because you've lived in Qatar, you're somehow pro-Qatar. But a journalist doesn't work like that. You have to have the integrity to challenge as much as you can. Now, every day I can't get up because there's only one of me and consistently catch every single thing. So you focus on sporting aspects, which means that when the Newcastle takeover happens, you're going to look like you're somehow anti-Newcastle, but you're not. You're just pro the truth. And then you'll notice with me and many of the other journalists that perhaps you've been calling pro-Qatar, that we will go over to the World Cup and we'll cover the football and everything else we see. And at that point, we might get told by Qataris that we're anti-Qatar, but we're not. We're pro-truth. We're pro-balance. And it's not hypocritical to have worked in Qatar and criticized Newcastle's Saudis, because that's not my agenda. My agenda was to find the truth. And my in point to the Newcastle takeover was around BN's piracy battle with Saudi Arabia, which was the crux of the delay. And it was funny because fans would always sort of say to you, well, you're just fueling it. There's no delays. There's no red flags. And then you think retrospectively now, it's all calmed down and the takeover's done. 18 months passed. So there clearly were problems and red flags. And then when the piracy was resolved, shock horror, the takeover got done very quickly. So naturally, fans perhaps who felt like they were getting bullied by the English media and there was an agenda against Newcastle. Maybe now retrospectively we'll reconsider, and come the World Cup, you might be surprised that there'll be a lot of press out there trying to get to the bottom of everything around Qatar, from how it's organized to its human rights, to its labor problems, to its conditions for those that come from countries contributing to the World Cup that are from less affluent areas or aren't getting paid as much. And that was the same with Brazil and the same with South Africa. But I think what you have to understand is that there's only so many times on a global scale when a issue outside of sport becomes prominent in a sports context, like really directly prominent, I mean. So sport should always use itself as a platform to be socially conscious, but it's only really World Cups, Olympic Games, takeovers, in this case, simply because of PIF's links with the Saudi Arabian government and who their chairman is. There's not that many times. So when a sports journalist focuses on it, it is going to be a bit ad hoc. And I accept that the same level of scrutiny should be there for Manchester City's owners, but I was working out in Dubai when that takeover happened, and my magazine is Sports Talk, and the same level of scrutiny for that takeover was in my magazine in a monthly basis. It's just the fact that you didn't read it or you didn't hear it because you don't live out there or you didn't buy it. So Twitter's a bit of a horrible place in that respect, because you get called out for something and it's not reflective. Whereas I'm on CBS broadcasting in America, the Newcastle fan base won't hear that. I'm in the Middle East broadcasting. The Newcastle fan, this is 4 or 5 years ago, won't hear it. So you don't get an accurate picture of me on Twitter, and I don't get an accurate picture of you. But you see only my Newcastle stuff, and I see only your trolling back if you don't like my opinion. But we don't actually know each other, which is why on a podcast like this is really useful, because we can actually have an in-depth chat about it. And then people start to understand that there's no agenda there. I'm a journalist doing my job. You're a fan loving your team. And no wonder we're going to have differences.
Absolutely, Ben. Absolutely. It's all about opinions at the end of the day. If you don't agree with opinions, then walk away. But look, at the end of the day, we like your opinions. Hope you like our opinions. And that's what it's all about. Do you know what I mean? So happy days. Got my guy Alex as well. We just missed out on Alex by Callum Hudson as well. Likely loan back up if Diaby doesn't work out. So basically, we still have the Diaby, right? But just wait and see on that one. But if we get him, we need not get him. But I know a lot of people want this player anyway. But he wouldn't be my first choice. But if he comes in, I would back him 110%. I've got one here from AH as well. As a Sunderland fan, I thought, nah, I'm not going to read that, mate. Sorry. And I've got he's a Mackham, so I'm going to read it. I'm going to say, look, for us, slum it on the dark side for a bit, mate. If you like each other, hit the subscribe button if you're brave enough as a Sunderland fan. Brad, a question for Mr. Jacobs.
Yeah, just sort of going over some of the previous answers, just about the ownership as a total. I'm thinking, what's your opinion on, since the takeover, has it really shocked you of how we've gone about it? Sort of bringing in Eddie Howe, particularly with the troubles we had under Steve Bruce, then going on to the improvements we're seeing throughout the squad with the players in the transfer market. I'd like to think we've been quite clever and done some great business. So thoughts on that as well, and then sort of what's your opinion on what the future holds for Newcastle, particularly over the next few seasons? Do you think we could push towards a trophy and you know, give the fans something to really get behind? I think it's been just a absolute overhaul of just hope, really. So it's just great to see from an outside point of view. What do you think of that?
I think they've done brilliant on the football side, the culture side, the connection with the fan base. And that's the thing, that when you hold them to these high standards, the disappointment is only that we don't really know any more about PIF specifically and their plans. And even Newcastle fans surely want to know answers like, are they going to buy any more football clubs with so many other takeovers rumoured? Are they going to invest further in conjunction with the Rubins into the community? What's going to happen with any stadium redevelopment, and the same for the training ground and so on? And these are questions for the majority owner. Now, if Amanda Staveley comes forwards and says, I've spoken to PIF and I'm now speaking directly on behalf of them, then that's a compromise. But you look at Chelsea, and even before he came in, Todd Bowley, who's now the chairman and interim sporting director, was talking directly to fan groups, and he'll continue to do that. And Chelsea may even get a sort of de facto golden chair. I don't think they'll get anything formal in the short term, but if there's a heritage-based decision, or if the stadium plans need fan approval about what they want to change and how, there'll be consultation. So that's the area for improvement. But I think what we've seen is this instant connection with the fan base again. And when Newcastle are invested on the field and are passionate and put in the kind of 90-minute performances that the fan base expect and in the style that they expect, then there's no louder, no better, more committed fan base, I don't think, in the Premier League. And overnight, that connection returned between players and fans, between fans and ownership group, and the ownership group will hope between Newcastle and the Middle East, specifically Saudi Arabia. So that's all great. And then in the market, very sensible signings in January and shrewd negotiators. They're not caving, as we've seen with Ekitike, towards agent demands just because people perceive that they've got money. So they're acting, as you would expect, in a very patient way as far as recruitment is concerned. And that's refreshing, because if I suddenly saw Newcastle put in an insane offer for like a Gareth Bale at one end, or even potentially a Neymar who would excite Newcastle fans at the other, I'd start to think perhaps these are signings that come from PIF. And again, we know nothing really directly about their plans, but it looks like everything is part of Howe's wishes and Dan Ashworth's strategy, and him coming in keeps everything grounded and structured as well. And there just seems to be very humble, very community orientated people and players. Kieran Trippier, even when he was injured, showed that. And I really like Dan Burn. Matt Targett is an excellent signing after a very promising loan spell. Bruno's obviously the one that's sort of set the fan base on fire, and his partnership with Joe Linton, and who knows, Tielemans, I say in tongue in cheek, could be just about the best in central midfield in the Premier League if you had those three, or one of the best anyway. So I think they've done everything right. They've been slow when they've needed to be slow. They've been kind when they've needed to be kind. They've engaged on social media when it's required. And just these little sort of comments or likes go a long way with the fan base, because Newcastle fans are so used under Mike Ashley to be frozen out, to have no communication. So it's really only that one aspect of transparency with the majority owner. So then Newcastle fans get a sense, not just of the short term, because everything's been about firefighting, come in, and obviously a long saga to even get in, and then speed to get Newcastle out of trouble, and then finding a manager that can implement the right style and get results, and then breathe end of season. And now they're thinking, how can we strengthen and add depth to probably just get into the top half, which would be a sensible aim. I don't think it'd be a bad season for Newcastle if they finish between 7th and 10th. I think European football is possible, but very much a bonus next season. But obviously, if they carry on the momentum and the form of the back end of last season, then you wouldn't put it past Newcastle to be 6th or 7th in the table come the end of the season. And St James's Park is very fast becoming a fortress, which means you only need to sort of win, lose, draw away from home. And if you're winning 70-80% of your games at St James's Park and beating the sides at home that are around you in that top half of the table, you've got an excellent chance of finishing above a Leicester, a Wolves, a West Ham and Aston Villa. And that puts you in that 5th, 6th, 7th position, which is a best case scenario for Newcastle. So all of that, I think, is really good. But now they've had a bit of time to breathe. Now they're going to have a full summer. Now I think they're nowhere near in danger of relegation. And I think you can say that confidently without the ball even being kicked. I want to know that one missing aspect of what are you doing in the long term? What's the growth strategy for the brand like? Are you going to Saudi Arabia for regular games and training? Are you going to open a soccer school there? How do you fit in with Vision 2030? Is the majority ownership group coming over regularly? Do they have a say on day to day? Who's really controlling the finances? What kind of budgets are we talking about within financial fair play? Not all of these answers will be given, as with any football club, but I think fans, and I would like to say media because I'm selfish, but let's say, fans to begin with, deserve the opportunity to directly engage with the majority owner to determine what their strategic plans are for both club and community. And I think if that's done and the fan base don't feel that they're just distant, then it's reassuring to everybody that Newcastle are united and have a strategy beyond just winning football games. And that's the bit I'd like to see over the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months.
Good answer. Good answer. Got Danielle as well. I'm grateful to the owners for the hope I have again. I take all the grief and the press for a lovely shiny cup. That's a Danielle. She's lovely, Danielle. If you see her live, she's amazing. Ben, what do you think of the style of the expectation will be coming this season? You pretty much covered that, didn't you? Could be finishing 6th. And
yeah, I think so. I think that there may be divisions between the different ownership factions at the group, like they're united and they work together, but it's clear that Yasser Al-Rumian may have one thought and Amanda Staveley day-to-day may have another. So that makes it quite difficult to assess what goal they'll have set. But usually a football club tries, if you're in Newcastle's position, and I'm talking from experience and knowledge of teams like Wolves, Villa, Leicester, from a budgetary point of view, you set 10th. And you never tell anyone openly it's 10th, but from a budgetary point of view, you want to get 10th. That's what you plan for on your books. And then if you end up getting 9th, 8th, 7th, you think, oh, that was a good season. At that point, you start to say, we've done really well. We've exceeded expectations. And obviously, if you get European football, particularly Europa League or better, that's when you've exceeded your budgetary expectations. So I don't think the ownership group will set a football expectation unless Eddie Howe wants that pressure hanging over the players' heads. But I think that budgetary-wise, they'll have set 10th as their kind of yardstick that they then plan as to what they think with prize money is going to be coming in.
Brilliant, brilliant. Got some comments from Billy, or BT I call him now. Does Ben think, does football is better idea with the vast amount of money, or better in the 80s and 90s when money, although around, was not so important? That's a cracking question from Billy.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, unfortunately, I wasn't really around in the 80s to give you a first-hand perspective, but I've seen a lot of kind of late 80s and early 90s football. The 90s for me was when I really got into the game with Leicester. It was the Martin O'Neill era. But I think the key differences are the culture, which I think is better now. I much prefer footballers when they're professional. And even though the personality aspect has disappeared a bit from the game, I like the fact that we've moved away from the kind of Sunday league drinking culture that then can extend in fan base to kind of hooliganism and violence and toxicity. Football is much more inclusive now, and footballers are much more socially conscious. So I prefer that aspect. And then I like the fact that with some of them, we still see the personality through things like social media. I think the other thing that's different is obviously technology. And I've always been a fan of the majority of technology and just rule changes as well, even if we're not specifically talking about VAR, which is perhaps a bit more contentious. But I'm really excited to see how these semi-automatic offsides, for example, function at Qatar 2022. I'm delighted we don't have the infuriating and boring pass-back rule anymore. And I also really like the idea of having a sort of American style clock that might stop when the ball goes out of play, so we don't have that sort of time wasting. So those parts are really good. And it's exhilarating really to have these peak elite athletes that can do things that they couldn't do in the 80s anymore. So those I think are better now than they were in the 80s. The only thing that I really like and wish I'd experienced in the 80s is perhaps more just the up close and personal aspect, that players were heroes, but they weren't necessarily superheroes. So you could wait and get your autograph. You could get almost claustrophobically close to them, and local communities and opinions mattered, and you might know the player. More of them were born close to you. You knew their parents, you saw them around town. And now obviously as footballers become sort of superstars, they're living in mansions. There's almost like a class divide. And I don't mean that in the sense, by the way, that footballers think that they're better, but I mean that in the sense that due to a demand with like a CR7 or a Bruno, and Ronaldinho was a good example, who I spent some time with at the Champions League final, he couldn't walk anywhere without getting mobbed by 1,000 people. So then he has to have bodyguards, he has to have protection. I'm sure it's the same for Messi and CR7. Whereas my grandparents, for example, had a market stall in Leicester right next to the fish market, and Gary Lineker's family had a stall right next to them. And when Lineker was a kid, the parents knew each other, and they used to give Gary Lineker a little bit of food from their stall. It was a fruit stall with like strawberries on and so on. And then when Lineker became famous, the parents and even Lineker still remembered them, and they went to the same barber for a while. And it's that aspect of like, you idolize someone because you've got an affinity with them, right? And in the 80s and the 90s, you could meet them, you could be like them, you could bump into them in a non-football context. There was sort of no airs and graces, whereas now everything is a bit more brand-led, market-led and protected. So you never quite see the reality. And in not seeing the reality, it might mean that you also don't see the bad. So that can actually be a positive, but you don't see the real. And I think deep down, football fans want authenticity, not just idealism. So if you're a young kid, of course, you absolutely want to see Messi or Bruno at Newcastle perform at his peak. But because of the digital age, you also want to know what he's really like, what his favorite meal is, who his partner is, what car he drives. You want to be able to sit outside his house and have a selfie and a photograph and feel like if you're close to his age, you could be mates with him. And if you're younger than him, you could be him. And if you're older than him, he's got a respect for the fact that you've supported Newcastle for 50 odd years. And Newcastle's players are pretty good at that, but they still engage at a safe distance. And obviously in the 80s and 90s, it was a bit different. So very different. But if I'm judging it in football terms, I prefer it now. If I'm judging it in technology terms, I prefer it now. If I judge it in culture terms, I'm split, because the inclusivity of football is better now, but the connection directly with the footballers themselves is worse. And that's probably the one thing I'd like to take from the 80s and bring into the modern era.
Wow. There you go, Billy. There's your answer, mate. And, you know, I've gone for the 80s, 90s, 2010s as well. So for me, I prefer it now, to be fair, but back in the 80s and that as well, they used to play for the love of the game, in my opinion. Alex again as well, tuned through Stato. I believe many are frustrated because the criticism towards Newcastle doesn't seem to be balanced or scaled in relation to the attention Chinese, Saudi Arabia, Qatari sponsors, orders are getting. Is it too much? Or it's too much? I think
you just see it as skewed because you're Newcastle fans. So your algorithms on social media feed you Newcastle content, and you actively look for Newcastle United stuff. And yet I remember when the Live Golf launched and all the golf fans were saying, why is everybody being so critical about this and not the Formula One? And then I had to look at the Formula One, and the Formula One fans are saying, God, everyone's making a big fuss about the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. And therefore, it's not always reflective what you see on your news feeds because of how digital analytics and algorithms work. You're fed the content that it wants you to see. So unless you actively go looking, you're going to find more criticism towards Newcastle than you perceive to be towards golf or anything else that's in Saudi Arabia. The other thing I'd say is just that, of course, it was going to be more skewed towards criticism to Newcastle United because the takeover was 18 months of drama. And it wasn't positive news. It was all about Saudi Arabia having a feud with Qatar and Saudi Arabia pirating Premier League content and the Premier League having arguments with Mike Ashley and Newcastle United. Whilst at the same time, the PIF structure was in urgent need of clarification in the Premier League's eyes, and in doing the due diligence of who they were and what their connection was, it naturally becomes apparent that PIF is the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund and their entire board, including MBS, is royally decreed. So there was always going to be that debate, and any debate was around stumbling blocks and what was stopping the takeover. So over 18 months, your narrative will be skewed purely because the takeover didn't happen. If the takeover happened, the narrative would have been skewed the other way. So if there were no red flags, as Amanda Staveley claimed 18 months prior, and the takeover was approved, then when the criticism then came in saying, how are these guys in the Premier League? Newcastle United or the Premier League would have been able to say, well, we've checked into their structure and we don't believe that there's any legal links, so move on. But because the whole debate was around are they or aren't they government controlled and influenced, and it was 18 months, you will perceive the takeover to have all been bashing Newcastle United and headlines against Newcastle United. And this is why I come back to what I said before about the kit and about the plans. It's not that there's an entitlement for fans and media to know everything. It's just a missed opportunity not to use the positives that tie Newcastle into Vision 2030 to show the flip side. So if you feel during the takeover that PIF got a bad rap, that Yasser Al-Rumayyan has no links to the government and that this isn't sports washing, and I respect that position. And by the way, I'm not saying that I come down on fully the other side. I'm very balanced about it, or I try to be. I take each instance and thing in its own context, but I'm also just not going to forget about what Saudi Arabia have done in the past. But you naturally have to accept that not everything Saudi Arabia does is Newcastle United or PIF. But the point is that if Newcastle take the stuff that is directly relevant to them and show how it's helping the Newcastle community through Saudi Arabian funding, how it's helping promote diversity and inclusion in Saudi Arabia, how it's one part of the sports project that launches NEOM, which is like a westernized super city in Saudi Arabia, with facilities that will be used globally by teams. If Saudi Arabia ever hosts, say, an Olympics, then that will be a big part of it. There's sports rehabilitation centres, similar to the Aspire Centre, who have got a tie-in with Leeds United. So there's all kinds of things in sports science, in medicine, in sport itself that could have a connection back to Newcastle, because a player might go there for treatment, or Newcastle might found a soccer school that creates jobs and helps integrate the Newcastle brand into the Saudi Arabian community, etc., etc., etc. And vice versa. There's an inverse aspect to that as well, where whatever the tenets are of Vision 2030 in sport, promoting exercise, reducing obesity, diabetes awareness, jobs, health, mental and physical, all of that should in theory be brought back to Newcastle. So it's not just about what Newcastle can do for Saudi Arabia, it's about what Saudi Arabia can do for Newcastle. So then in that context, if these are the positive narrative you want because you think the media are being negative, then when Eddie Howe goes over to Saudi Arabia and gets asked about it and says it was great, and then gets pushed on it and says I'm just a football manager, that's the missed opportunity I'm talking about, because most fans and most media haven't been to Saudi Arabia, but I have, and others have, that have a bit more balance and context about, yes, what it's done in the past and where it's heading to. And then you have to make your own decision as to whether it's sport washing its way in this context to progress, or whether the progress is genuine. But either way, Newcastle have been over there, right? The players and the manager. So when asked about it, insight is key if you want a positive narrative. Because if Eddie Howe answers a question and says, I'm just a football manager, every journalist will follow up on that and push him. And if he continues not to offer any insight from his perspective and Newcastle's perspective, then the headline is going to be that Howe is dodging key questions and Newcastle are being sport washed. But if Eddie Howe turns around and says, well, look, when I was in Saudi Arabia, we actually hosted a women's training session and we're considering starting a football school for men and for women. And we went to NEOM and we trained, and it's got sports science facilities that are used by hundreds of different clubs around the world, and it's diverse and it's inclusive. And we also met with an LGBTQ plus group that came to watch us train because it's Pride Month. And what we've noticed is that within Saudi Arabia, there's an interest towards Newcastle, and those groups are really excited to have us come to Saudi Arabia because they believe that we as a football club can help change the culture permanently for the better. That would be a good answer. That would be a good headline. That would be a good narrative. And then Howe is controlling the positives rather than dodging the negatives. And if you dodge the negatives, you'll fuel us media to push even harder, because not only are we not getting any answers, but it feels like Newcastle United don't have them to give. If Newcastle, on the other hand, control the narrative and try and give the positives, then if we as media keep pushing, then all Howe has to do is say, I've given you my answer, I've given you my experience, I've given you my first-hand account. And he could even say back to a journalist, have you even been to Saudi Arabia? And 99 times out of 100, the answer would be no. But as soon as Howe just says, I'm only a football manager, just like the golfers, one or two said, we're just golfers, then they will get more negativity because they're dodging the point instead of giving the counter argument. So I'm not here to say, here's right or here's wrong. I'm not coming in as a journalist trying to catch Newcastle United out. And I'm certainly not coming in with a one-sided agenda of bashing the football club, because it's a great football club that I've always had a soft spot for. But what I am doing is trying to get to the bottom of the reality from both sides. So I would far more appreciate Howe giving me his experience, because he's been there more recently. And if I've got a counterpoint, I'll ask him about it, but I would respect it if he gives me an opinion, not dodges the question.
Just answer the question, so for yes or no, basically. But I was going to come on to that question. I just want to make a question. Do you think Eddie Howe is right to dodge the questions about Saudi Arabia, sort of thing? Then you answer the question. So it's a hard one for me, Ben, because
I've seen something in the chat, by the way, that just says that it's unfair for Howe to answer a political question, but that's not what I'm saying. Howe doesn't have to answer Khashoggi. And this, again, is why the majority owners need to speak directly. Otherwise, everything will fall on Howe. Like, do you remember when Thomas Tuchel was in front of the media and everyone was asking him about Abramovich? And he said, look, you keep asking me about Abramovich, but you're going to have to ask Abramovich. And I think Newcastle's ownership group are the same, that if it's political or Saudi relationship between PIF and government, Yasser Al-Rumayyan has to come in front of the press. And he's done that before. I've been in Saudi Arabia when he was talking about his new golf tournament, and he was fine for half an hour to be making comments about Jamal Khashoggi. It was all pre-planned and he knew exactly what he was saying, but he didn't dodge it. And all that's being asked of him is he sits in front of the media, and then we have fair opportunity to ask our questions, and he's got fair opportunity to answer them. But my point with Howe is that he should be saying what his football experience was in Saudi Arabia, and then we not only get the ability to consider Newcastle's ownership group through Yasser Al-Rumayyan politically and the connection between PIF and the government, but we have the opportunity to see what it was like for Eddie Howe. What were the facilities like? What's Saudi Arabia like? Did you find it inclusive? Did you do any training sessions for men and women? Did you speak to anybody else in sport that's worked with other clubs? Are the facilities top notch? Will players be going over there for rehabilitation? Are the training camps private? And how has it helped Newcastle United? Are there different kinds of pitches? What's it like training in that kind of heat? Is it going to benefit players in World Cup years? Is it going to benefit Newcastle United with that warm weather training? All these kind of things. But instead, he just said, I'm just a football manager. And that was my problem with it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going through this comments here. We're going another 20 minutes or so. Is that all right, Ben? 20 more minutes?
Yeah,
cool, it's fine. We go through these comments and we get the lads' questions again. Danielle's asked, which three players would you take from Newcastle United? And would you take Kieran Clark, Dwight Gale, and Jeff Hendrick to Leicester City?
I wouldn't, unfortunately.
No, not the free signing.
Not unless we get relegated 2 divisions to League One. I would take the following 3 players to Newcastle. I'm going to try and give you realistic ones rather than pie in the sky names.
Okay.
I think the winger would be Diaby for sure, simply because exciting signing. And then I'm going to pick a second winger that outside chance, but probably unrealistic, which is Paqueta. And then a striker that is available is the tough one, really. And I'm going to be a bit controversial. And I'm going to say Dominic Calvert-Lewin.
Wow. I was going to say, I wouldn't have him personally, but I think it'd be good for Leicester City. I think it'd be brilliant for Leicester City if he does.
Oh, I was saying
you know what I
Newcastle.
mean?
Sorry, I was saying you 3 for Newcastle. I can give you
3 for
3
Newcastle. Sorry, Dan. 3 for Newcastle. Would you,
I can give you 3 for
which 3
Leicester
players
as
would you
well.
take off us?
Oh, which 3 would I take off Newcastle to Leicester?
Yes.
I would take Bruno for sure.
Yeah.
I would take Joe Linton for sure, and I would take Trippier.
Yeah, good choice. Good choice there. And you shouldn't, and you don't want Kieran Clark Dwight going. You get relegated by 2 dibs.
Yeah, I'm going to stick to my 3 that I've just named.
Fair enough. We don't use comments. Sorry, lads, we'll get it back in soon. You got to remember there has been promises made by incoming talent like Bruno and Trippier regarding European football. It's not just about the budget. We can't break promises. That means you got to deliver. I have to agree with you there, Alex, as well. What is
I'm
these
not
tickets?
sure on that, though. Just briefly on that. I don't think Newcastle have promised any of these players European football. I think they've promised them a project and to be compensated for trying. But Trippier, in my opinion, and Bruno didn't join Newcastle United for European football. Trippier knew what he was in for in the short term, which was Newcastle United being bottom of the table and in a relegation dogfight. And given that a player like Trippier has played at the highest level, has won La Liga, I think he's sold on the culture of the football club and the connection with the fan base and regular football that is back where he wants to be in England. And with Bruno, I think you can see exactly the same. He just loves playing for the football club. So I don't think that these players will be particularly disappointed if they don't get European football in 2 or 3 years. I think Newcastle's aim is to get into Europe within the next 2 or 3 seasons. And then once they've done it once, be regular. But in 2 or 3 seasons, who knows who will be the core of the football club? And therefore, to say to a player right now, or even in January, when Newcastle were bottom of the table, we're going to try and guarantee you European football in the next season or 2. I think that's an unrealistic aim.
Yeah, have to agree there, mate. I agree. Ryan's got a good question, by the way. What do you know of Florentino Perez, Ben? I'm in the camp where if Madrid comes to one of our players, i.e. Bruno, it could be game over with their pool. How demanding is he and how ruthless is he? Does he get what he wants?
Well, I mean, Barca and Real both can get what they want, and they do transfer business very differently. So clubs always work windows ahead. But as we're seeing with Rafinha in Barcelona, Real and Barca pre-agree a lot more terms verbally with players and then use that as leverage. So you've got 2 ways, very loosely speaking, of doing a deal. You can either go to the club first, then to the player. Frankie de Jong is a good example of that. Manchester United trying to agree a fee. They may not succeed, but after that, they then negotiate with the player. And then you've got the Rafinha tact where you agree terms first and then you use that as leverage to try and get a sale with the club. And Arsenal have done that with Yuri Tielemans as well. So the challenge is that whilst Bruno is at Newcastle, speaking purely hypothetically now, Real could swoop in and say, will you agree to these terms? It might take a year, it might take 2 years, but we want first refusal on you, or this is the package we'll offer you. And then suddenly the player is essentially waiting for that football club to come in. And at the same time as seeing Real win a Champions League, they might be seeing Newcastle 10th in the Premier League. And slowly it builds this narrative in their head that Real is their pathway and Newcastle United becomes a stepping stone. Now, I'm speaking very hypothetically here, but that's how Real work. They sell players these stepping stone pathways and they agree deals early and they overpay early on terms in the hope that by the time they land the player, they're underpaying. And that's quite a smart tactic. So you go to a 21-year-old who's on, let's say, 25k a week. Chouameni is a good example of this. And you say, when you come to us, you'll immediately be on a minimum of 100,000. And then depending on when we get you and what your wage is, and if it's gone up at your existing club, we'll negotiate the finer points of it. So then that player's like, wow, Real Madrid want me in a season or 2 at 100k, that's 80k more than I'm earning. But then, of course, by the time the player joins, that can be quite good value to Real Madrid because they can be a sort of box office player. So that's part of the muscle. And then the other thing is just that Perez and Laporta operate in a different way. And we might see Todd Bowley a bit like this at Chelsea, not in personality, by the way, but in the proactive, hands-on way that they do business. So Yasser Al-Rumi and Amanda Staveley, they're not out day on day courting players. They're not involved in the politics of a transfer. They're not talking openly about their targets. But Laporta and Perez are exactly of that mold, where they use PR to fuel their narrative. So then you're constantly nipping away at the players you want. You're constantly agreeing verbal terms. You've got a monopoly of agreements with agents who bring you the players that you want and box other clubs out of the market. And then you're using media and PR to fuel this belief. So Barcelona are saying, we're going to get Lewandowski, we're going to get Rafinha, we're going to get Koundé, we're going to get Azpilicueta, we're going to get Alonso. And you're like, well, how? You've still basically got no money, but somehow they get everything done their way. And it's very business orientated rather than football orientated. They use tactics from outside of sport to get deals done that we don't see a lot of directors in football in other clubs and leagues do. And then just the fact that they've got a monopoly and they've got the power over La Liga, and that helps as well. So even though Javier Tebas is really outspoken, he needs Real and Barcelona, and Laporta and Perez, they know that. So therefore, they've got, again, the control and the power saying, we want this amount of money. We want these players. So then if La Liga say, we're not going to register Lewandowski, that's a public PR threat. But the reality is that if they get Lewandowski, he will be registered, because La Liga need a strong Real Madrid and Barcelona. So Perez is much more business orientated, much more hands-on, much more cutthroat than most that you'll see in the Premier League. And that means that if Bruno has a dream of playing for Real, then if Real want Bruno, they will be able to pretty easily pull him away from Newcastle United, unless obviously Newcastle get themselves to a point where they're level with Real Madrid. But it's not just Real Madrid, it's anybody that has a specific club that they idolize. And unless, and Mbappe is probably a good example of this. So if you're Real Madrid and you know Mbappe idolizes you, then you're able to put an agreement in place. And the only counter to stop that happening was PSG matching that offer, and they were lucky almost in the sense that he's settled and he's French born. But Bruno isn't Newcastle born, and Newcastle don't have the PSG style counter offer. And that's what Perez does. He swoops in with bigger offers, bigger promises, long-term promises, plus the heritage and prestige of the club, Champions League football, playing with your stars, playing with your idols. And unless Newcastle get to that PSG level, then there is always that danger that the muscle, the cutthroat nature, the proactivity, the money, the prestige of a Real Madrid is going to take a player like Bruno away from you.
Well, that's a fair answer, that, Ben. It really, really is, yeah. But when you get Real Madrid coming for you, then, in my opinion, you got no chance of keeping them. And that's a great question for Ryan. We're going to get one of the lads and one more question each. I'm going to start with you this time, Brad. Question for Ben.
I was just thinking about, I was going to cover some of the players. What about, were there anything on the loan market for us potentially?
I think that Newcastle sources have sort of intimated, without necessarily being specific or rigid, that this will be their plan, that they might buy one, loan one. And that would suggest that they're exploring who is out there on the loan market, at least to some degree. And Broja might be the player, because he could be persuaded by Chelsea to be loaned. I think that Newcastle would be better off pushing for a permanent deal. And the reason for that is because there's three sides to this. There's Newcastle, who would want a permanent deal ideally. There is Broja, who is waiting to hear whether he's integral or more integral to Chelsea this season or not. And then his perspective, if he's told he's surplus to requirements, may be that he doesn't want to be loaned. He would prefer a permanent deal. So he's been at Vitesse, he's been at Southampton, and we don't think about the players enough and their health and their lifestyle. But if you've done 3 consecutive seasons in your career on loan, there comes a point where you say, well, I got 6 Premier League goals. I got 8 goals in all competitions for a Premier League club. I don't want to go to a new club, a new dressing room, and then risk being hauled back. And then there's obviously the club perspective, which is that in an ideal world, they probably would like to just keep Broja, so then a loan makes sense. And Newcastle, I think, will be torn, because if they loan him, they probably will want some kind of option to buy. But if he does well at Newcastle, Chelsea won't want to give that. So that's where a straight loan might come in. But it needs buy-in from Broja. So it's kind of win-win, I guess, for Newcastle and West Ham, who are the other chaser. Because if there's a loan agreement, Newcastle can get it. And if there's a permanent deal, Newcastle can get him. But the danger with a loan is that if he does really well, like really, really well, and let's say improves on his tally from last season, which might get him somewhere close to 10 plus goals, then at his age, Chelsea are bringing him straight back and doing the same thing as this season and assessing him. And then Newcastle are back to having Chris Wood, Callum Wilson. So I think he's the opportunity in the loan market for sure. Yeah. But there is still a question mark over whether he'll be a loan or a permanent deal. And you've got to be able to beat West Ham to his signature too. And that's the other challenge.
Brilliant, brilliant stuff. And for you, Tony, question for Ben.
Yeah. Excuse me. There's been some rumours lately that Jamal Lascelles could be on his way out of Newcastle, with Chelsea, West Ham, and Leicester interested. Now, if Leicester want him, we'll take him in Part X for Tielemans, and that would be a good move. If you've heard anything on that side, and also have you heard any rumours on that we're looking at Amin Ghouri from Nice?
I haven't heard a great deal about the Lascelles to Leicester. That's the first thing to say, or Chelsea, in fact. I think that the caliber of clubs looking at Lascelles are more the newly promoted, Forest in particular, and even Fulham. The Leicester interest, I personally haven't heard. I can't say, because at CBS we don't follow every transfer and every player. Could be something in there that I just don't know. But as far as I'm aware, there's no interest on the Leicester side there. And it's, just a matter of, I would imagine, without being an expert in this particular player, a matter of when, not if, he leaves, because there does appear to be a reasonably high volume of interest. And then with Amin Ghouri, I think that it would be a fantastic signing for Newcastle United. That's the first thing to say. He's a really, really good player. He would obviously be coming in as a kind of Ekitike replacement, because that deal is dead. And even though some might tell you it's still an ongoing saga, and that there might be some hope of revival, that's not my understanding. It's also important, by the way, that fans realise that clubs never say the deal is dead, because there's a long stretch of the window, and who knows what could happen. So the last thing you want to do is burn your bridges, but you quietly back off and say it's dead. And then if they don't get a striker, you might find that they cave to some of the agent demands on the last day of the window or something. But Ghouri will be like a reasonably unknown prospect, probably to a large-ish proportion of the Newcastle fan base, unless you play Football Manager, where he's one of those like sensational style talents. But he has gone on to become a good part of the French senior squad. He's won a few trophies. He's about 6 foot, maybe slightly smaller. He got into double figures, I think 14 or 15 goals, something like that, before he got his call up. He's just a very intelligent kind of clinical finisher. Not necessarily a instant solution at Premier League level for goals, but one that will be exciting and have a part to play if he signs for the football club. And I think that what I like about him compared to Ekitike, from what I hear anyway, is that there's that same swagger on the football field, but off it, he's a little bit perhaps more humble. And I don't think that Newcastle would be dragged into any of these agent demands. I think that if Newcastle do advance their interest, and that's the big question at the moment, then not only do they get a 22-year-old who's excelled for Nice last season, they get someone that's a bit more versatile, a bit more team-orientated. I think he got 12 goals last season, but as importantly, he weighed in with 10 assists. So then that versatility shows you that he's very capable of playing as a striker, but he can also filter over to the left side as a winger, and he's good on his right foot as well. So you get this real all-rounder that has weapons from an attacking sense from all over the front line. And that's why I think he'll be of appeal to Eddie Howe. So I can't claim to be an expert on how far Newcastle are along on this deal, other than the last time I checked in, the interest was very real, but naturally they'll have a range of other attacking targets. And if they are pursuing, let's say, Diaby, then Guri would only then be brought because they think he can be only a striker or predominantly a striker. But let's say Diaby doesn't happen and you bring in Guri, you've got that opportunity to use him in his niche role, to move him onto one side or the other, to have him be more a cut inside kind of player, or to have him play behind a Callum Wilson a little bit more centrally. So all of those options are at Howe's disposal, because regardless of what you see him do at Nice, my understanding is that he's equally as comfortable on both sides centrally, or as a little bit more of a focal point in a 4-4-2, in a 4-5-1, in a 4-3-3. So that gives Howe a lot of tactical options. And I actually think he's the kind of player that could come into the football club and play a better role away from home than at home, where either he comes on or he gets the start away from home, and then he's got that sort of positivity about him. That's probably the key word. And I think Newcastle in the first half of last season just looked clueless away from home. There was no tactic, there was no plan, but there was no confidence or ambition. And then in the second half of the season, I think it was the Southampton game in particular, you just saw them not be perturbed when they conceded, be prepared to commit numbers forwards a bit more, and movement off the ball was a big improvement too. And that's why they had a slightly better run on the road in the second half of the year. And they just believed they could get something from games, even if they didn't always entertain. They believed they could pick up points. They believed they could win games. And also if they went behind, it wasn't game over. And he's that type of player again, that whether he starts, whether he's central, whether he's wide, he's got that, because Nice have done well. He's got that sort of momentum and belief where he won't be phased or afraid on the road. And I think that unsung work off the ball, that little flash of creativity and that ability to, of course, score and assist could actually be more useful on the road than at St James's Park, where Newcastle will have more of the ball and control the game a bit more. So I think he'd fit in really well, but I can't claim to be an expert on this one as to how far Newcastle are actually along on it at the current stage.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about him, Ben, at all whatsoever. I've heard of him. I don't know a lot about him, but I should keep my eyes open on that one, because I'm going to do European football content very, very soon. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I'm going to go through this comments before we wrap up, because I know you guys are busy. Yes, but I'm trying to catch them, take a look at the stream, give it a thesis, we will see. Wow, amazing insight from Ben. Thank you. Great stream, John. Thank you very much indeed from Bold Geordie. And big up to Alan. And he's talking about the train thing as well. But the train in front of us, pick up the steam. We want to put it that way. The top six can still outspend us due to FFP and income is a lot higher than us. Get Ronaldo in, that's not going to happen yet. I think we can catch him given time. We'll just see. And yeah, that should be it. Well, that's going to be it. We're going to wrap up the show there, because you've been on an hour and 20 minutes. And it's always great to see Ben on here as well. And guys, you down the bottom, thank you too as well. And Ben, did you enjoy coming on your show? Yeah,
always a pleasure. Love engaging with yourselves and the Newcastle fans. And hey, let's hope you have a good window and a good season, because the strong Newcastle on the field is great for the Premier League and obviously great for Newcastle fans.
Fantastic. And before I let you go, where do you think you'll finish?
I think you will finish 8th.
8th. I'll take that. 8th and a good cup run, maybe.
Yeah, I think a good cup run. Obviously, 8th is a little bit like being the bridesmaid rather than the bride if 7th is Europa Conference League. So it just depends what kind of 8th. Like when Leicester finished in the top half last season, we rose up to the top half. So it felt quite good, because we ended up being above Wolves and finishing strong. So that's what's kind of quite interesting, that if you start the season well and drop to 8th, then fans will be disappointed. If you just sort of stick around mid-table, go on a cup run, get a few big results, and then finish with a surge into 8th, then everyone will be delighted by that. So it just depends on the context. But I honestly don't think Newcastle will quite qualify for European football. And if you're going to miss out on European football, I'm putting you in the next best position, which is 8th. And I still think that will be above Leicester, by the way, who I think will finish 10th.
Fantastic. I'll tell you 8 to 10th there. We'll probably finish for Man United or Hope and probably finish Leicester City as well. You never know. And got 2 more comments there. Big up to GMs. Thanks so much for coming in. And also, great show, John and Guesty on the next one from Gareth. Thank you, Gareth. And guys, thank you very much indeed. I'm with you guys backstage. And if you like the video, like what you see, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Also, become a member, hit the join button. Super chats, just give what you can. Ben, where do we find you on your socials, mate? For the people that don't know.
Yeah, at Jacobs Ben is Twitter. I don't really use Instagram, but if you want to follow for dog photos, that's Ben David Jacobs. And then make sure you follow CBS's football content as well. The handles on all platforms, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok are CBS Sports with an S, Golazo, which is a fancy word for goal, and that's GOLAZO. So CBS Sports Golazo is Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.
Beautiful. We should check up on those as well. Ben, you've got cracking contents there, cracking breaking news as well on your Twitter account, which is fantastic. And well, thank you very much for coming on, Ben. And I read you guys backstage. And we'll definitely go again. And thank you for coming and making the time to join my channel.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Take care.